We're about 6 months or thereabouts away from the general elections in February 2023, and about a month and a half away from the beginning of campaigns officially. But in spite of that, there's a lot going on in the country, even in politics. So many things to talk about today on the show. We'll try and see what we can get our hands on. I'm joined now by one of our regulars here, Timi Olagunju. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Like I said, campaign season is not here yet, but there's a lot already going on. But I think paramount on everyone's mind still is security, or the lack of it. That continues to be a huge problem for Nigerians. It looks like every day, every week, there's a new incident. I think a lot of Nigerians were thrown off recently by the news about these cars donated to the Republic of Niger to help fight security, according to Mr. President. But the brand of cars that were bought, people are wondering, how do you use those kind of cars to fight security at a time when we know the need for money in this country, especially with us, especially with our own internal security problems? How did you receive that news? Did you think it made sense, the explanation of the Minister of Finance, to say that it was important to collaborate with our neighbors to fight insecurity?
As much as it might be important to collaborate with our neighbors, it's also very important that, we consider what we call policy priorities. And as it stands, like you've rightly put it, there are a lot of policy priorities before the government, which is much more internal and has to do with our national cohesion as a people than, that particular policy agenda or whatever that is. And so that itself, it seems like the government decided to major in minor and then ends up becoming a minor in the major.
Yeah. So I asked that because, with how crazy, for want of a better word, things are security-wise in the country, a lot of people still believe the APC candidate is the front runner in these elections. Interesting, because the PDP was voted out by a lot of people in 2015 because of how unsafe a lot of Nigerians felt. Do you see this having any effect eventually as things continue to get sort of scary, or are there too many issues to consider besides security, you think?
Well, security is a key issue, considering the state of things right now, particularly the threats. You see that evidence is the end of argument, right? And we've seen from the evidence that it seemed like when they issue the threats, they actually meet it up with actions. And interestingly, it doesn't seem like we're doing anything proactive to deal with the issues. Look at the prison break, classic prison break in Abuja. Look at the attack on the president itself. So if the number one citizen, in quotes, the chief servant of the people, can be attacked with such boldness, and then it begs to wonder if we are not all at a very perilous time. So security is key, but it's also a cascade of many other things. There is increasing poverty, right, as it stands at the moment. There's increased levels of unemployment. The issue of students being at home instead of in school is also a key issue, because these are national assets. A country cannot develop beyond the investment in human capital. And time is of essence. Time is life. Time is not just money. And you have the time of these young people wasted on the altar of, of such issues. And then within that same context, and it's money that is the core issue here, you're taking out money from taxpayers' money that belongs to the Nigerian people, our resources, and then, doing what we call fine bara with Niger Republic. That itself is not acceptable, considering the policy priorities that we have, beyond just security.
I found it interesting that the former chairman of the APC, who's now, I think, a member of the campaign organization of Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu of the APC, appeared on an interview and sort of tried to distance the APC candidate from the current president, saying, oh, this might not necessarily, that the candidate should not be judged based on the performance of Mr. President. Some saw that as a bit of an admittance of, we don't want to be attached to whatever stigma this president might have. How do you view that, especially coming from a candidate who also sort of said he was going to continue from when Mr. President stopped? Do you think there's a bit of sort of a realization from the APC that maybe this might not be a good
Well, what I see basically is an inconsistency on the part of the APC, because you cannot appropriate and reprobate at the same time. You cannot say, oh, we are not for and we are for. You need to take a stand. And the situation that Nigeria is a situation where the leadership needs to take a stand. Take a stand against corruption, take a stand against insecurity, take a stand against students wasting away at home rather than being in school to contribute to our human capacity and economic development. And these are core issues. Take a stand against poverty as it stands. Take a stand against politics as we have it. Because politics as we have it has led us this far, right? This far where our debts, each Nigerian is owing significantly. If you break down the national debt to how much the unborn generation, there's this quote that came out from, I think, a U.S. A leader at the time that says, blessed are the American youths. But I want to contextualize it to Nigeria. Say, blessed are the Nigerian youths and unborn youths, for they shall inherit the national debts. So the context of issues now as it stands needs a leadership that will take a stand. I don't see the APC in that context as showing from their inconsistency in terms of the body language and their words that they are ready to take a stand in terms of the core issues that, it seems that it is politics as usual, and politics as usual cannot take Nigeria from the mess that they have put it in.
I want to talk about the vice presidential candidates of the Labour Party, who also had a viral interview recently where he pretty much said he wasn't going to reveal his tactics or his party's plans to tackle security. It's been interpreted in several ways. People said, oh, you don't reveal your plans so that nobody steals it, so that the insurgents or bandits or terrorists are surprised when it happens. But also some other people saw it as, does he really have a plan, or do they have a plan? What did you think about that?
Well, those that ask the question, does he really have a plan, really are asking the right question in that context, because, leadership is about communication, right? And sometimes you may not necessarily throw out the intelligence of your plan, but you may throw out the objectives of that plan. I think all the presidential candidates must tell us to a large extent the objectives, the goal, the objectives behind their plan, without necessarily perhaps revealing the intelligence or the core strategy behind it. So it's important because conversation enriches the understanding. You might think you have a plan, and then when you share that, you realize that with the collaboration and contribution and feedback of others, because feedback is the launch of champions. So in order to build leaders that really are champion leaders in the context of Nigeria, we need people that are able to share, communicate with us what they have in context and give feedback. But he must have his reasons for stating that. But I think otherwise, he perhaps should start thinking on how to start sharing some of the goals and objectives behind his plan, if not the intelligence.
I mean, we're at a very, very scary time. We've seen what's happening in Abuja. Schools had to be shut down prematurely. Churches are put on alert. We're hearing reports about places like Ekiti where, the government is trying to be very sensitive with the borders. We're hearing that Lagos is suddenly in the conversation, saying the Commissioner of Police telling people to be careful. What does a feasible security plan look like? Not saying you're a security expert now, but we have at least three major candidates and other candidates who are running for office now. What should they be thinking about, insecurity, because it literally is hindering everything else. We're seeing an almost non-existent FDI now in the country. Inflation is rife. People are scared to literally do anything. You can't drive anywhere anymore. What should they be thinking about?
I think first thing when it comes to, I'm not a security expert, but a policy angle, one of the first things that I've observed with countries, right, where there seems to be increased safety, right, is first thing, economic prosperity, right? And economic prosperity translates to when the market woman on the streets feels like she can afford the basic necessities of life, the Maslow's hierarchies of need, food, clothing, shelter, etc. Right? So that's the first thing you realize with countries that are increasingly safe, the economy. So any serious person who wants to run for office should focus economy. That's the first key thing. Second thing is equity, right? You cannot have a society, an inequitable society, and expect justice to prevail, right? So equity in terms of policy making, in terms of how we deal with the leadership issues before us, might be able to also help instill that sense of justice in certain, climes or communities that can engender peace. Third thing is, one wonders what the intelligence agencies are really doing. Is it that they are always after people that are speaking out and giving feedback to the government in form of critique? Or they're really about doing intelligence work? Because that's the key. You see all these things about insecurity, you cannot rule out communities from them. And so intelligence agencies must find ways to start collaborating with communities in such a way that they can start fishing out the bad eggs. And lastly, I think there's a challenge with the leadership in the security apparatus of Nigeria. That's a key thing. Because you see, a leader is a dealer in hope. And so when you have a leadership whose goals and objectives do not align, there can be a problem. And you see that despite how much we are pumping into the security apparatus and infrastructure, it seems like a basket. We keep pumping money in and it doesn't seem to produce the result. I think there's a challenge with the leadership. There needs to be a questioning, a core questioning of the leadership of the security apparatus of Nigeria as to what their goals and objectives are, and if they have not shown a track record of performance based on metrics, there are other capable people to replace them.
I totally agree with you. I mean, we've had so many ultimatums from Mr. President. I think another one was issued recently, and we don't seem to see anything done when that ultimatum expires, and it just makes everybody wonder. But like I said, elections are in February. We have gone from rigging of elections now, it seems, to vote buying. It's the new way of doing things, quote unquote. So the elections are done freely and fairly, but there's a lot of inducement that's going on. We're hearing crazy rumors about amounts being budgeted per polling units by certain parties and all of that. And Nigerians are arguably poorer than they were in 2015, and probably even 2019. So there's an even bigger need for that inducement.
Yes.
Does it make you worry about the elections coming?
Oh, yes.
In spite of the excitement in the air, especially like with young people about the elections.
Yes, there's a call for worry, actually. There's a call for worry because, fund is fundamental to fund any mental thing. People have needs. Let's put that into contexts. And so when you toast the sugar that helps them acquire those needs, I'm telling you, they will go for it. It's like the case of Stalin. There's this, I don't know if it's a real story or, about Stalin taking a live chicken that they've kept in a cage, hungry for days, and plucking the feather of that chicken in front of his generals. And then he told them to bring corn and pour corn on the ground. And as he was moving with the corn, the chicken was still following him, having caused so much injury to the chicken. It instilled, So the point is that Nigerians emotionally, psychologically, socially, economically have been tortured by successive leadership that have turned the government coffers to their own personal wealth for their own personal greed and aggrandise. So basically we've had that over time. And so even when people know that this is their number one enemy in that context, and they see them toss that corn, there's a tendency to follow through with it. And so that's where the challenge is. I cannot tell you that I have a solution, or a recommendation to deal with this issue, right? But what I can say is to appeal as much as possible to Nigerians, not just only the people that are involved in this act of collecting, the demand side, because the supply side will always supply. They want to win elections, right? And they control some of the part of the supply side, also control the machineries of governments, the EFCC, the ICPC, and the likes. And the way our constitution is constructed, they have a lot of sway over those institutions, right? So what I can appeal is that the demand side, the people, should look deeper into the consequence of their action. That if I collect that 10,000 naira from this particular person or this set of people, and I vote rather that which is outside the context of my conscience, because common sense is not common sense. People know what is good when they are able to see it, except they've not seen it. And so when they are able to realize the consequence of their action on themselves, on their children, the woman who is struggling, selling corn to send her child to school, that widow selling corn to send her child to school, is not able. Increasingly, that child should have graduated and start providing support for that woman, that widow. But because of the strike, the woman then starts to, it elongates the suffering for her in that context. And so, you see that the effect of this thing is so much on everybody. And so, realizing that consequence is key. Then lastly, in terms of the other part of we Nigerians, if you are somewhat well-to-do, extend a hand to somebody. It's not too much, right? If you believe in a candidate, and that's where the challenge is. If Obama was a president, wanted to run for president in Nigeria with his Harvard debts, trust me, nobody will rate Shigbai Kobo for him. So we need to start understanding that sometimes, we need to stretch a hand. That 5,000, that 1,000, that 500 to candidates we believe in are running for office. Because fund is fundamental to fund any mental thing. And I think we can start off from there in that sense.
Thank you very much, Timi. We're all keeping our fingers heavily crossed, waiting for September, first of all, for the campaign season to start and see how things play out.
It's going to be massive.
And hopefully we'd rather have the noise than the violence. So if it's all noise, then we're good. And we hope that February goes well. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
We'll take a quick break now and be right back. Please stay with us.